I think we've given it enough time. Thank you for coming, everybody. So nice to see you here. I think we can begin. So, first, what I would like to do is just do a little arrival. So, feel free to join in with this or not. But I think just to begin this evening, I'd like to invite everyone who's come along to just pause for a minute and take a few deep breaths. Now, if you'd like, just reach out to this labyrinth that we're showing on the screen here and begin to trace its path with your hand. And as we enter the labyrinth, we are letting go of the stresses of the day, the distracting things that we've been going through on this Monday, um, and letting go of maybe some of the confusions that accompany daily life and arriving into a new space. And as we enter the center of the labyrinth, maybe we can feel a little bit balanced and present and pause in the now, here. And as we turn around and begin to retrace our steps out of the maze, maybe we can allow ourselves to arrive in this space and in this topic for tonight, which has to do with myth and symbol and pilgrimage and the strange landscape of a group of tiny islands in the middle of the Atlantic. And then as we exit the maze, we have undone our journey and arrive just where we were before, and everything is as it was, although maybe a little bit different. So, thank you all very much for coming. I think the first thing we'll do is just go over the schedule briefly for this evening. So, we've arrived, and after that, we'll introduce ourselves and this project. After that, we will talk for about 40 or 50 minutes about our research so far about labyrinths, and that's kind of split into two parts. One of them specifically about labyrinths here on Scilly, and also about labyrinth mythology and symbology generally. Um, and after we finish talking about labyrinths, we'll have a quick break for about 10 minutes. And then when we return, we will talk specifically about Giant's Castle Maze, which is the site that this art project that me and Teän are running centers around. What we've been doing there, what our plans are. Um, so, and after that, at the very end, we'll have an opportunity for apparently our volume is not very high. Maybe you can't hear us so well. Might have to bring the computer a bit closer. Can you guys? Okay,
Is this better? Can you hear us okay?
just have to
Okay.
get cozy.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It's a good thing we like each other.
Nice. Okay, thanks, guys. Um, right. So yes, and then at the end we'll have a chance for some questions or comments or whatever you'd like to share. Um, Throughout the talk as well, if you'd like to put comments and questions in the chat, we can endeavor to answer them as we go, if there's something particularly burning, or we can address them at the end. So, without further ado, um, an introduction to us first. My name is Layan.
And my name's Teän, and we are two artists. We met at the RCA a couple of years ago, and I grew up here in the Isles of Scilly, and I brought Layan back with me to live here a year ago or so now.
Yeah, a little over.
And we were really interested in Scilly's labyrinth heritage, um, particularly this maze on St Mary's, which I used to walk when I was little. And my mum told me it was made by the fairies, and when you got to the middle of it, you could make a wish, and the fairies would grant it for you. So I have made a lot of wishes in this labyrinth, and it's brought me a lot of luck. So when we returned and we found it quite overgrown, we decided that it would be a wonderful public art project to find out as much as we possibly could about this place that was very special but not very much known about, and then restore it in some way that was fitting with the community here.
So this is the maze that's pictured on the screen right now. And just to say, this project, which we're calling the Vanishing Labyrinths of the Isles of Scilly, was funded using an Arts Council project grant, because the Isles of Scilly are a priority area right now for Arts Council funding. So that's how this project is being resourced, and yeah, that's what we're using to get this done.
And also just a little note that Layan is kindly going to take the lead with this presentation and do the lion's share of the work, because I'm just getting over the flu. So if I'm a little bit foggy with my bits today, then my apologies, but that's why. So yes.
So just for those of you who don't know, the Isles of Scilly, where we live and are speaking to you from currently, are a tiny archipelago of islands, 28 miles off the coast of Western Cornwall. You can see them here on the map. They're very, very small. 5 of them are inhabited, and there are many, many smaller uninhabited islands and rocks here as well. So for those of you who don't know what a labyrinth is, a labyrinth is traditionally defined as a pattern with only one path. So you might have seen kind of what get called like unicursal classical labyrinths in the past, like this is the kind of normal labyrinth that you might imagine in your head, the kind of twisting design. Tian's got a necklace of one. Um, they're pretty common. They're a symbol that you see all over the place. Scilly has a unique heritage of pre-20th century tradition of building pebble mazes. So mazes made of sea pebbles, just placed simply on the turf. Usually they're about 4 or 5 meters wide, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller, put on coastal locations around the islands, and people walk them. They're very, very simple and yet unique and very mysterious and strange. So here are some of the labyrinths that you can find here on Scilly. Oh, I should also say that some people make a distinction between mazes and labyrinths, in that a maze is a one that you can get lost in. It has choices and dead ends, and it's possible to make the wrong choices and not come to the center. In a labyrinth, there's only one path, and you can find it all the way to the center. A while ago, me and Tian decided that we were going to use those two terms interchangeably. So you might hear us doing that throughout this presentation. And the reason for that is in the place names of Scilly and Cornwall, maze and labyrinth are used interchangeably. And also mazes and labyrinths can morph into one another, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So these are some of the mazes that you can find here on Scilly. So sort of going clockwise from like top left. The first image is of Giant's Castle, which is here on St Mary's, the largest island. Next to that is Popplestones, which is on Briar. Clockwise down from that on the bottom right is Troy Town Maze, which is on St Agnes. This is the oldest and original maze here on Scilly, and it's a scheduled ancient monument. And then next to that is one of the mazes on Whit Island Bar on St. Martin's. There are many mazes there that kind of get built and rebuilt and move around all the time. Um, so I think first of all, we were going to give a little bit of a background on Troy Town Maze. Now, this is not the maze we're looking to restore with this project, but it is the oldest here on Scilly, and it's the one that kind of you could pretty reasonably believe to be the instigator of the labyrinth tradition here on Scilly.
Yeah, because this
So,
one is unique in the UK. It's there are other pebble mazes elsewhere in Europe, predominantly in Scandinavia, but none else like this one in Scilly, in the UK, just in Scilly. There is a tradition of turf mazes on the mainland in the UK, but none like this. So it is, yeah, unique and exciting. There's a lovely Cheryl Stratham quote here on the screen, which I think illustrates that kind of mystery perfectly.
yeah, so it's also a scheduled ancient monument, and it's included in the kind of scheduled ancient monument sort of complex on the area where it is, which is called Castella Downs, on an island called St. Agnes, which is one of the smaller islands of the Scillies. Um, and the entry to its scheduled ancient monument status says that Troy Town Maze preserves its original pattern, confirmed by 19th century photographic evidence. This is the oldest one we have on the screen here, despite some rebuilding. The maze provides a good example of a once popular and now scarce form of local pastime, and unusually retains the traditional name applied to mazes, which is Troy Town. So Troy Town is a really ubiquitous name that is found associated with mazes not only in Britain but all over Europe. The city of Troy, the walls of Troy, these are place names that are specifically associated with labyrinths for hundreds of years over a huge area. Um, its combination of labyrinthine pattern and mode of construction is unique in England among surviving pre-20th century mazes. It also shows well the significant place that mazes occupy in popular consciousness, not only giving rise to local traditions and place names, but more recently inspiring many copies created in several parts of Scilly by modern visitors. So, another really interesting aspect of the story of Troy Town Maze.
Could we just
Oh,
discuss the earliest mention?
oh yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
So,
Hang on a minute. There we
okay.
go.
So yeah, the earliest mention that we have of Troy Town Maze is from a article called Relief for Shipwreck Crews, which was from an 1875 report of a shipwreck, which discusses the Catherine Griffiths. And it said the only survivor is Giovanni Kastolovich, a native of Trieste, who drifted ashore under Troy Town on the southwest part of the island of St. Agnes. So that was 1875. And then this photograph came afterwards with 1885. And this is a different shipwreck. This is the SS Earl of Longsdale, which went down, yeah, just off the Maze. And behind the Maze, you can see the Western Rocks, which are one of the most dangerous shipping waters, probably, yeah, in the UK or possibly even in the world. There are so many shipwrecks here, and you can just see within 10 years there are two that have gone down in this exact place. Yes.
Which might be significant for its placement. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that in a bit. So, in terms of Troy Town's origin, one narrative goes that it was built by the son of a lighthouse keeper called Clark, T.A. Clark, and he was here on leave, maybe from the army, and built this maze out of boredom in 1729. This source comes from R. Morton Nance, who was a researcher who spent some time here in Scillies.
In an antiquarian, and he wrote the Book of Cornish Sea Words, I think, too. So he was quite a like reputable guy.
Yeah, so he was writing for the Royal Institution of Cornwall in 1913, and was told this apparently on like oral authority that this is when the maze was built. Another competing theory is that it was actually Norse in origin and has been rebuilt many, many times over the generations and the centuries. The reason for this thinking is that it is unique in Britain, and the closest parallels of the time period and earlier are on coastal areas and islands in Scandinavia, particularly Norway and Finland. Um, so there are many, many examples of like early medieval and pre-medieval pebble mazes, very similar to this one on coastal areas and islands in Scandinavia. Scilly is mentioned in several Norse sagas, and there definitely was a Viking presence here at some point. But the maze itself has never been the subject of an archaeological investigation because it's a scheduled monument and there's lots of special permissions you need for that. So it's still a matter of conjecture, but this is like the narrative we choose to believe because it's really exciting and cool.
And we're artists, so we don't have to necessarily take just the factual kind of evidence-based things, and we, as you will see, can drift into conjecture quite happily.
Yeah.
So,
It's a beautiful story,
yes.
and we really care about it. So now, moving away from Scilly temporarily, we wanted to give a little bit of background on labyrinth symbology and mythology, which is a huge topic. There's tons of this, but we've kind of cherry-picked some particular examples that we really like and that kind of relate to the story of labyrinths here on Scilly. So we've selected a few little tidbits from kind of the international like material on labyrinths, which again is an ancient symbol that's been around for thousands of years. So there's masses of this stuff. Um, so the first thing we'll mention is the oldest references to the labyrinth as a symbol, which come from Knossos on Crete, where it's been used as a symbol since at least the early Bronze Age. The kind of this is the Mycenaean civilization. They have a really famous like royal complex on Crete. This stone on the screen now is an engraved stone from that complex. I should add, even though in the classical literature there's lots of references to uh, a labyrinth with a minotaur in it that was a physical maze that you could get lost in. No archaeological evidence has ever been found of that, even though there has been uh, the palace complex has been uncovered on Knossos, but yeah, nothing there so far. So this symbol that's carved onto this stone is generally thought to be a double-bladed axe called a labris, and it was supposed to be engraved over the entrance to the original labyrinth. Um, and it's usually interpreted as a double-bladed axe. But there's a really interesting etymology of the word labyrinth that John Fowles wrote in his book Islands, and he believes something a little bit different about this symbol. So I'll just read out his etymology to you. So the Labries that supposedly guarded or warned against entering the labyrinth is no axe, but a dancing bird symbol of fertility or food. So two birds meeting together like this, beak to beak. The Labris is not a Greek word, but I believe its origin can be plausibly guessed. One has only to say labor to feel the mouth and lips move to peck in and gulp. There is a Greek adjective labros that means forceful and greedy, gluttonous by extension. Another word, labax, meant she-wolf. Labrum is Latin for lip, and their labor, our labor, is based on an ancient sense of slipping away and of the consequent suffering and anxiety which we retain in the labor of childbirth. The need to eat, the need to work to eat, the need to propitiate the forces that control fertility and climatic conditions. This is what the ancient labyrinth or maze truly signifies. Even the monster at its Cretan center, the bullman Minotaur, is a fertility symbol. I know the maze on St. Agnes was first built not by a bored lighthouse keeper of the 18th century, but by a Phoenician sailor 2,500 years earlier, and know equally well that no serious archaeologist would for a moment support such a hypothesis. So, again, beautiful stories kind of swirling around the labyrinth, kind of at the edge of plausibility. This is a ancient coin from Crete showing the design of the classical labyrinth.
And there's also a lot of discussion about the labyrinth symbol as a archetypal symbol of threshold spaces and the unconscious. Carl Jung said in his book Man and His Symbols, where these lovely labyrinths are from, that the unconscious is often symbolized by corridors, labyrinths, or mazes. particularly in kind of dream symbology. And in this great book, the Book of Symbols, which is a reflection on archetypal images, there is a lovely passage that I will read. The labyrinth is an ancient symbol whose convoluted form, found naturally in seashells, animals' intestines, spider webs, the meandering body of the serpent, the eddying of water, the internal structure of underground caves, and the whirling galaxies of space, has always been highly suggestive to the imagination. Spirals and meanders, precursors to the labyrinth, have been found among the cave paintings of prehistoric peoples, often incised on or near goddess figures, carved animals, cave walls, and thresholds. These labyrinthine spirals indicate the symbolic passageway from the visible realm of the human into the invisible dimension of the divine, retracing the journey souls of the dead would have taken to re-enter the womb of the mother on their way to rebirth. And that has a very interesting parallel in India, where labyrinths are used as an aid to childbirth. In this fabulous book, Mazes and Labyrinth, Nigel Pennick discusses this practice where when a woman goes into labor, a priest would come with an image of a labyrinth. And that practice is, he describes to her how to enter mentally the entrance at the top of the pattern and follow its winding pathway in deep concentration. After having completed the journey to the center, she must find her way out again. So this sort of image of the labyrinth as this sort of symbol of a kind of doorway or a portal between these kind of two states is kind of quite a universal and other beautiful kind of image there.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Moving now towards Scandinavia and talking a little bit more about the folklore around labyrinths in Scandinavia. I'm going to draw on this fantastic article by where do I have it?
This one.
Oh yeah, like put it away. Whoops. By John Kraft. So this is published in Kydroya magazine in 1986 originally, which is an amazing publication all about labyrinths. We've used tons in our research.
Yeah.
So John Kraft carries out this fantastic survey of the different folkloric traditions associated with labyrinths in Scandinavia. This on the screen here is in Sweden. It's an 11-circuit classical labyrinth made of pebbles that's in a very coastal area, quite close to the sea. So some of the ways these were used were for fishing magic, particularly. He says that people used to use them to still storms or to raise up favorable winds for sailing and to avert bad luck. So he says that in the old days, people thought there were little people, smagobar, who could bring bad luck to the fishing if they came along in the boats when the nets were examined. But if one walked the labyrinth to the center, then the bad luck people would accompany you. From the center, one should run as fast as possible to the boat and immediately put to sea, and the smagobar will be left behind, still trying to retrace their steps out of the labyrinth. So this theme of kind of tracing the labyrinth to the center in order to get ill things lost in it and then running out quickly again, that recurs a few times in the labyrinth folklore, to do with ill winds following you into the labyrinth, maybe bad fairies, wolves to protect your sheep. And I have to read out as well this other fantastic story that he writes about himself trying to track down some of the last practitioners of labyrinth magic in Scandinavia back in the 60s. So he writes that the most recent and exciting example comes from the small fishing village of Kugoren in northern Sweden. It seems that the old magical practices connected with labyrinths were still performed here in the 1950s. A fisherman from Södermoja in the archipelago east of Stockholm, already mentioned, told me that he sailed to Kugoren in his fishing boat in 1955. There he saw an old man running through a large labyrinth and at the same time spitting in his hand or on something in his hand and throwing it backwards over his shoulder. The purpose was to bring luck for the fishing, probably for his sons who were out at sea fishing at the time. It was obvious that the old man thought he was doing this in secret without being discovered by anyone. Unfortunately, the old man died in 1963, several years before I heard of him and visited Kogoran. None of the inhabitants would confirm for me that the old man practiced labyrinth magic in the labyrinth, but it was obvious that he was well known for his sorcery. His daughter-in-law told me that before he died, he wanted to teach his sons about his magic secrets, but they showed no interest. As a matter of fact, hardly anyone in Kogoran could understand why I was so keen on finding out about that old man, who might have been the last surviving labyrinth magician of Northern Europe. So these amazing labyrinth folklore traditions survived, well into the 20th century in Scandinavia. And it's easy to imagine that, in centuries past, people were doing very similar things at Troytown Maze on St. Agnes, but again, speculation. So I think now Teän is going to talk a little bit about pilgrimage and the stone here.
Yes. Yes. So this is the Hollywood stone, which is a carving of a labyrinth that was found in Ireland. And it was discovered because two men were chasing a weasel, and the weasel went under this stone, and they lifted up the stone to catch the weasel, and they discovered this labyrinth instead. So maybe the weasel got lost in the labyrinth, maybe it made its way out free to another dimension, who knows. But it's described as its location was close to an ancient trackway used by pilgrims known as St. Kevin's Road. This linked Hollywood with the sacred place of Glendalough. This early Celtic monastic connection was one of the reasons why it was believed to be a cross when first discovered. Yeah, because apparently people wouldn't have recognized a labyrinth because it was not a symbol that was readily seen, I think. So it was quite amazing when it was discovered because of the weasel, and this image was revealed. So it's possible that it was a marker for the pilgrim's path, a possibility reinforced by the fact that the labyrinth has long been a symbol for pilgrimage in the Christian tradition. So this is another interesting link with Scilly, because we have a really, really old Christian tradition here. I think the earliest recorded church here is from the 5th century, and there's lots from like the 8th century, and there were lots of hermits and lots of pilgrimages here. So perhaps, yeah, this is another reason why this symbol has persevered. There's also mention of labyrinths being connected to holy wells and saints' wells, and the Troytown Maze is pretty close to Santa Warna's well on St. Agnes. And Santa Warna was the patron saint of shipwrecks, and also for kind of safe navigation through Scilly's waters. She is a pre-Christian saint who arrived in a coracle from Ireland. So perhaps there's a link there. Again, a lot of conjecture. I also meant to mention earlier that there was a history, well, historically, when the parliamentarians were successful in Scilly in the Civil War, because Scilly was a royalist stronghold and they were eventually defeated on Tresco, one of the first things that the parliamentarian Protestant folk did when they came was to go to St. Agnes and burn down the church, which suggests that there may have been some kind of older religions practiced here, or things that were a little bit more out of step with traditional kind of Puritan Christianity at the time, which may have been, again, this is total conjecture, but that may have been at the time when the labyrinth stopped being used and got covered over, or fell out of use because of kind of more strict Christianity that kind of came in at that time.
And then was maybe rebuilt by a lighthouse keeper's son a few centuries later.
This is a pilot gig. Scilly is really famous for pilotage. So if you don't know what pilotage is, it's basically the practice where during the time of shipping, massive ships coming back and forth with goods across the oceans, places like Scilly had a lot of rocks and wrecks. So there were local pilots who would go out in a boat like this one and show people the way past the rocks through to safe waters again. Either, sometimes they would go up the Bristol Channel or up the English Channel, and they would, show people the way through. And there's a link with labyrinths being used in Viking times as an aid to pilotage as well. So that's another interesting connection here. And if you look at the position of Troy Town Maze, which is facing out towards the Western Rocks, which is one of the most, one of the most dangerous spots in Scilly, you can understand why that connection may be there. And something else that we noticed is that because we were building our own little labyrinth with pebbles, and pebbles are really heavy. Those kind of pebbles, they were so heavy. And we're like, God, you wouldn't want to carry these far, would you? But actually, right by Troy Town Maze is not where you get the smooth pebbles. They're from the kind of other side of the headland, where there's plenty of nice, fresh, pristine grass that you could lay a labyrinth out on if that position wasn't important. So we think that it must be there facing the Western Rocks for some reason. Like that wasn't for convenience. So yeah, another lovely link there that could be followed up with.
Yeah, beautiful. So this image is of a petroglyph, a rock carving in Cornwall, in a place called Rocky Valley, which is in North Cornwall near Boscastle. So there are two really well-known rock carvings here in this valley, side by side. And the plaque nearby them says that it's from the Bronze Age, which is highly unlikely, really, that these date from that long ago. But nevertheless, they are probably quite old, and no one is sure exactly where they come from. But they illustrate this really fascinating Cornish connection to labyrinths, and they've been used, for many centuries in association with different folkloric practices that unfortunately we know little about. Another connection, interestingly, with the pilgrimage tradition and the Hollywood Stone is that there used to be a cell of a saint in Rocky Valley as well, Saint Nectan. The falls there are still named after him. So there's potential that the labyrinths and the medieval early Christian pilgrimage connection is present here as well. So another moving on to some other like really interesting Cornish connections. In Cornish dialect, you would say that you're proper mazed to say that you're kind of confused or you're not sure where you are or what you're doing. People say that you're in the right Troy town if you're really confused if you don't know what's going on. So again, like kind of referencing mazes and labyrinths in the way that they're speaking. These people on screen here are dancing a dance called the Snail Creep, which originates in Goonhaven, I believe. And there's another very kind of labyrinthine looking dance called the Snake Dance. And that's especially interesting to us because, like, in the earliest references to labyrinths in the classical literature, they're compared to dances. So W.H. Matthews in Mazes and Labyrinths mentions that Virgil draws a comparison between the complicated movements of the game and the Cretan labyrinth. So the game he's talking about is what's called the Trojan game, which no one is quite sure what it is, but it's often mentioned in connection with labyrinths. And they think that it may have been a sort of ritualized dance danced on horseback. Another reference is the crane dance or Geranos, which apparently was danced by is it Theseus who went into the labyrinth? Yeah, when he's running away from Crete to escape King Minos, he dances the crane dance. So this connection between dancing and labyrinths is very ancient. And the scholar Sophie Strand actually goes even further because, as I mentioned earlier, there was never any actual physical evidence of a labyrinth as a place found on Crete. And so she says instead that the labyrinth was never a static object or a place. It was never a stone corridor. Instead, it was an event. It was a ritual dance to honor the bull and the annual rising of certain constellations. Each passageway was a chain of human hands. The labyrinth was only ever the sacred relationship between people dancing, inscribing the patterns of the sky into the soft dirt of the ground. So it's very easy to imagine the connection here again with the dances that have been danced in Cornwall for hundreds of years, if not more. A really interesting account of snail creep is written by Mr. Reg Salmon of Goonhaven.
Good old Reg Salmon of Goonhaven.
Yeah, who wait a minute, no, that's not right. It's sorry, Charles Lee, who was a vicar stationed in St. Morgan in 1903. And he writes in his diary about the occasion of a snail creep that's danced. He says, the mazy evolutions had endured for a full quarter of an hour. One or two elderly faint hearts had dropped out, and several of the younger folk had attained a painfully exact knowledge of the spot where the new shoe pinched. When one of the leading bandsmen um, signaled to the fugleman, who nodded and prepared for the final maneuver by shaping a straight course for his starting point in the middle of the field. Here he began what appeared at first to be the primary evolution over again, but before the circle was joined, a slight change of direction converted it into an inward winding spiral. A shout from the knowing ones gave warning to all of the imminent climax. Tighter and tighter were drawn the coils, slower and slower grew the pace, until, amid much laughter and shrieks not a few, the leader lifted his flag at arm's length and stood calmly triumphant in the center of a huddled mass of breathless humanity. So this beautiful Cornish dance tradition is something that we think it has a really powerful resonance with what's going on here on Scilly, and something that we want to explore with this project that we're doing. Oh, also in just another quick note about Cornish dialect. In Cornish, a snail is sometimes referred to as a bullhorn. So the kind of winding, spiraling snail and the bull, and the kind of fertility symbol of the bull, and the connection with the labyrinth there is also really interesting. So next we're going to return to Scilly, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the more recent history of Troy Town Maze, and particularly its connection to dowsing. So this photograph here is of a restoration that took place to Troy Town Maze on St. Agnes in 1989. And it was led by Donovan Wilkins, the man in the hat, and he is accompanied by Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst. All three of those are really quite well-known dowsers and earth energies people. Hamish Miller kind of popularized the theory of a Mary line and a Michael line kind of running through Britain, and are all kind of really well known in their own right, and as very famous dowsers. And the reason that these people, particularly Don, were invited to come and restore this maze is that Donovan was almost like a contractor on the islands before this. Because there's no streams or rivers and very few springs on Scilly, all of the fresh water at that time had to come from boreholes and wells. And several of the wells that are used on St. Agnes and St. Martin's now were found by Don Wilkins back in the 70s and 80s. When he came here repeatedly, he even blasted his own boreholes like on St. Martin's, and these are still used today. He was a really effective guy, and the story goes that the islanders were a bit dismayed at the kind of dilapidated state that Troy Town Maze had gotten into, and he was invited to come to St. Agnes and try and repair it, which he did. He used his dowsing rods to discover that the center of the energy of the maze was actually a few feet away from where it had been originally. And so he took the stones off the ground and he moved them, added a few more, and recreated this design. When that happened, there was a huge amount of controversy about it. It became really infamous. There's even an article in the Solonian that I've got here that says,
The Solonian is our local magazine here.
yeah. So from summer 1991, it says Troy Town under siege after divine intervention, moved to save Scilly Isle's ancient maze. A psychic energy redesign angers archaeologists. So the archaeological community were really upset about this, because they were involved, and because he didn't take adequate records of the restoration as it happened. And many visitors as well kind of wrote angrily to publications. So we also have this article from Main Mambro, which is a fantastic Earth Mysteries publication about all things in Cornwall, ley lines, crop circles, ancient sites. Really, really brilliant for our research. And This man had written to May Mangrove about visiting Troy Town Maze after this restoration, saying, I am saddened, angry, and still quite upset. Troy Town was always a magical place for me and has been since we first discovered it in the late 60s. It has never been the sad, neglected place that Paul Broadhurst claimed to have transformed. Um, this act of deliberate or accidental vandalism is such an acute pain. So many people were very upset about this. And up until very recently, the scheduled monument official entry about Troy Town said that all of the archaeology that could have said one way or the other whether it was Norse had been destroyed in the 80s when it was moved by Don Wilkins et al. But interestingly, in a response to that letter, Paul Broadhurst wrote, underneath the remains of the maze, believed to have been made by a bored lighthouse keeper in the 18th century, were the remnants of previous mazes sunk into the earth. This scotched the oft-quoted myth that Amor Clark, the lighthouseman, had created it to while away the time, and showed that he had simply returfed the site and laid new stones, much as we were about to do. It looked as if the place was far older than had been thought. So all of these stones, they explicitly say, were left in the ground and covered over, and the new maze was built just over the top. So there is still archaeology there, and actually Catherine Sawyer, one of the leading archaeologists here, recently had the scheduled monument entry changed to reflect that. So it couldn't just be treated as if, there was no information to be gleaned, and therefore, it didn't matter. But we thought this was a really, really interesting dichotomy for the story of Labyrinths on Scilly. It seemed like there was a kind of conflict almost through lack of conversation and dialogue between these two sort of opposing worldviews, one to do with ley lines and dowsing, and one to do with like kind of scientific archaeology. And they seem to be kind of coming to a head at this kind of nexus of the labyrinth. And it felt like a really, really important part of the story. So we felt like we needed to tell it as part of this. Did you want to add something?
Just to say that this sparked this recurrence in maze making on the islands. There were always a few. The picture on the left is from the 70s. The picture on the right is actually me as a child in the late 90s. I don't know. And yeah, there was a big resurgence in maze building then, and they have been very important to islanders. And this is a quote that we had from someone I used to go to school with called Corentin, whose family have been so supportive and lovely with this project and have sent us a lot of the pictures that we've included in this presentation. So yeah, big thank you to them for that. And also to Jeff Soward, we've used a lot of his drawings and photographs as well. So another big thank you to him. And yeah, just read this quote by Corentin because it's really lovely. He said, I like the spiritual experience of a labyrinth. There is one route to the center and back again. As you travel through, you experience happenings, thoughts, challenges, etc. You reach the center and you travel back feeling renewed, refreshed, changed, ready. We visit Troy Town Maze every 2 years as some sort of family pilgrimage, spending sometimes over an hour running around the maze. This is something special I find. There is something special I find and something unchanging, while we as a family do. And then actually, unconnected to this, his brother actually sent me this picture, which is Corentin as a small child in the center of the maze, which I thought was really lovely. Yeah, really lovely detail. So yeah, we want to honor all these elements of the archaeology, the kind of dowsing history and the magic, and also people's individual experiences being here. And I think that's beautifully summed up by Cheryl Straffen when she wrote in May and Mavro in the winter of 1989 to 1990 that on commenting on this whole sort of back and forth between the dowsers and the archaeologists, she said, perhaps there is a lesson in all of this for the future, that all interested parties should get together and listen to each other's points of view before acting unilaterally or laying down the law about the sites, which for many people are living sacred places which need protecting. Yeah.
And I think that sort of sums up our labyrinth research so far. So we are going to take a short break, and we will come back, what should we say, at 1/2 past? Is that too long?
Should we say 27 minutes past? That's 10 minutes.
Okay. 27 minutes past for a short break, get a cup of tea, stretch your legs, and after the break we will talk about our research into Giant's Castle Maze. and our intentions there. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you all soon.
Oops. Sorry, everyone who's just joined us for the second part. We haven't covered much. We're just talking about Giant's Castle Maze.
Yeah. Anyway, so this is the scheduled monument map for Giant's Castle Headland. So this scheduled monument covers the Iron Age cliff castle and like earth embankments that are there. The dotted line there you can see is the coast path, and the maze is circled in green. Tom Butt's bed is a weird cave. It's named after a guy called Tom Butts. Poor, poor him.
And we don't know what path means, but
Unmetalled.
oh, unmetalled. Okay, great. So yeah, this was really good because we could show this to the Wildlife Trust and show that it wasn't a scheduled monument, so it was okay for us to rebuild it,
Yeah.
and restore it.
We also sought permission from the Wildlife Trust to do this project, who manage the land here, who've kind of given us the go-ahead and actually conducted an ecological survey of the site to ensure that we're not endangering anything that's like protected when we do digging there. I have to click screen.
Sorry.
Oh yeah.
So we something that we wanted to do was to survey the labyrinth in as many ways as we could before we began any restoration work. And we were extremely influenced by Time Team actually in this project. We did want to do a geophysical survey, but we were advised that it wasn't sort of suitable for this kind of location. But we had the next best thing, which is the wonderful Tom Gosker, who is a brilliant archaeological surveyor who uses very sort of high-tech technology like LiDAR scanning and photogrammetry to make these incredible renderings of the maze. And
so this is actually like an image rendering of a 3D model that Tom made using a combination of LiDAR scanning and photogrammetry. And the color, he could probably explain this much better than me, but the color gradient that you see there is related to height. So the higher it is, the kind of more close to red that it is. So you can get a real sense of the kind of the actual topography and the depth of the paths. And something that was really interesting, these renderings that he gave us after he scanned the maze, was the fact that you can see in some areas of this picture, particularly on the left, some ghost paths that are no longer walked, but you can still see where they used to be. So we get an idea of what the shape of the maze might have looked like in like past decades from these scans. They've been hugely helpful.
It also showed us where the entrance of the maze was originally. You can see
right very top of the image where you come in. Yeah. Oh, and the puddle as well.
Yes, so this image shows really clearly the biggest sort of enemy to Giant's Castle Maze, which is actually, we discovered from looking at some old pictures and Tom scans, this puddle, which is shown in blue here. And in the winter, this becomes very sort of boggy. It's across the coast path. So to avoid walking and getting your feet wet, people were walking over the edge of the maze, which meant that this kind of whole outer bank on the kind of top left there had been worn away. So part of our hopes for a restoration is actually to fill in that puddle with some locally sourced granite chips to make the puddle be somewhere else, and therefore the maze be a bit protected for future years. So these are all things that became really obvious when we had Tom's scans.
Another thing that we did was a more traditional, like graphical survey of the maze. So this is me and Teän up at the site conducting this survey. We were taught to do this by a fantastic archaeologist called Mark Bowden, who was here for a different project, which we volunteered with for a couple of days. And he explained to us how to do this and showed us some resources for how we could learn. So we had a go at doing this ourselves. The way it works, in short, really, is to lay down a baseline. These are the two kind of perpendicular tape measures that you can see there. We laid down these two reference points really across the maze and then use them like a kind of coordinate system, taking X and Y measurements along the two axes to kind of plot important points on the maze so we could accurately transcribe them by, turning centimeters to millimeters and dividing it by 2 and plotting it out on a little drawing, which you can see me doing there on the background. Uh,
And after, 2 days worth of out being out in the hot sun, it was really difficult to divide numbers by two. You wouldn't believe it. We were quite embarrassed by
yeah, it was really hard.
how hard it got. But this was the rendering
Yeah.
that we created. Do you want to talk about the hashes?
Yeah, sure. So this is the drawing that I did. Teän was kind of the chief measurer, and I was plotting all the drawings. This is a kind of neater rendering that I did of the kind of working one that we made. The little dashed lines are called hashes, and they're used in a certain kind of archaeological survey to show gradients or slopes. Um, the thick end of the hasher represents the top of the slope, and the thin end is the bottom. And the longer they are, that's the length of the slope, and the more dense the lines are, that's the steeper the slope. And it's a really, once you get your eye in, it's actually a really, really effective way of like showing sort of changes in topography and like quite a high level of detail. And we noticed that doing this survey, as opposed to just kind of going there, taking a picture and leaving again, we to get these measurements to decide where a slope begins and ends, we really had to kind of we had our shoes off and we were walking over this labyrinth in our bare feet, like trying to feel through the grass and the heather to work out what was really going on. And I remember going to sleep at night and like seeing the shape of the maze in my head, like it really kind of like puts you there and like makes it a lot clearer in a very physical sense in a way that kind of a digital survey might not. So it was really, really useful for that.
We feel like we know the site so well now, just from
Mm,
being there for 2 full days and like really feeling it out. So,
mm.
yeah, it definitely gave us another sort of perspective and a knowing of the maze. And also, we were really, really happy because we did that before Tom did his scans. And then when we got the results back, no, we did it after we'd done the scanning, but before we'd had the results back, and they matched up like almost perfectly. So
Yeah,
we were really, really delighted about that.
proud of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is another kind of survey we decided to do. So we kind of talked before about like kind of reconciling this like antagonism between the kind of archaeological materialist worldview and the kind of more like earth mysteries and dowsing worldview. And so we thought it was really important to actually have both of those voices informing what we ended up doing at Giant's Castle Maze. So we also dowsed the site and we enlisted the help of a local man named Michael, who's a dowser, to come and give us an idea of what the earth energies were like at the maze. So you can see here's Michael and me um, going along with our dowsing rods, which are just kind of L-shaped pieces of metal that you hold out before you, and they cross when you pass a energy line or some kind of disturbance. Um, we both tried dowsing as well, never tried dowsing before in my life, and it was quite eerie. They really do move without when you're concentrating as hard as you can to not influence them in any way. They move like a magnet has been put near them. It's very strange. So Michael, this is a rendering that I made based on what Michael discovered at the maze. He found these two lines of energy that crossed right through the center. Um, they're both associated with Athena, apparently. And one of them comes down from Giant's Castle Headland from the middle of the Iron Age hill fort, up from the sea, through the middle of the hill fort, down through the center of the labyrinth. The other one, the perpendicular one, goes kind of like parallel to the coast and joins a nearby stone circle on Salakey Downs. We asked Michael afterwards if he thought that the reason they crossed was because somebody had decided to build the maze at this point where they crossed, or whether he thought that somebody had moved it there afterwards.
Because apparently you can move energy lines around if
Mm,
you're a dowser and like invite that energy to come to that spot.
mhm,
And he thought it was probably the latter,
mm,
probably that someone had been to the site and redirected these energies
mm,
to come through the center stone in this way. And we also had a visit from another dowser called Lana, who picked up some different energy lines, which were running between the Giant's Castle cliff top up to the Porthelic burial chamber, I believe. And she said that different dowsers can pick up different things, and yeah, and that yeah, these two different kind of ideas can exist at the same time. People pick up on different things,
mm,
and yeah, it was just wonderful to have this sort of mysterious element of the survey also included in our research into this
mm.
site.
we thought it was a very important part of the story, and we wanted to include it.
Definitely. Gotta leave space for the mystery.
Yeah. This is Tom's wonderful wife, Tamina Goskar, who came and she's a geology and gemstone expert, and she came to have a look at the rock that is at the center of the maze and is so prominent, which many people, including ourselves, have assumed to be quartz. And she really interestingly told us that she thinks it's not quartz. She thinks that it's flint. Flint is a bit of an unusual presence on Scilly because Scilly is all granite. There's not really any other geology here. And flint doesn't naturally occur in granite, but it was brought here by glaciers, in the last ice age, and it's kind of mostly found over the northern parts of the islands on St. Martin's. And the prehistoric people who lived here on Scilly used this a lot in their tool making, and it would have made it a really favorable spot in prehistory to live because throughout a lot of Western Cornwall, you wouldn't have been able to find flint, and so it would have made it quite a special place that you could come here and you could find the stuff that was so important. Um, so the fact that it was flint kind of had this really interesting like prehistoric connection for us,
And it does feel like a very special stone. We wonder if the reason that it's lasted for so long is because of this sort of central stone that does make it so kind of prominent in the landscape, this big white stone. And perhaps we have some kind of epigenetic connection with like the uh, Neolithic people of the past who would have had reverence for this stone. We just found it really useful. We have decided that it must have been in the sea because it's got these smoothed edges, but we don't know if it was there originally and the maze was built around it, or if it was added later, or what. But it's definitely a kind of beautiful centerpiece.
There's another question we're really interested in answering about this maze is where exactly did this stone come from? It's almost impossible to find another one that's quite like it around the area. This is me and leading local archaeologist Catherine Sawyer sitting in the maze talking about it. She is a really, really fantastic wealth of knowledge about all things historical and Scilly, and she's been helping us out. She'll be present at the restoration this weekend. And we've previously been there with her on a couple of occasions. One time to do a little test excavation at the maze to work out kind of how it was made. And a really interesting result we got from that was that the walls of the maze itself are not made of lines of pebbles in the same way that Croytown mazes or lots of the other mazes are, which we assumed we would find if we cleared away some of the peat and the heather from the top. Instead, a lot of the banks are just made of peat. There's maybe one or two stones like scattered inside them, but a lot of them are literally just mounds of earth, which is really unusual on Scilly. There's not really any other mazes like that. And so we kind of came to the conclusion that from the original design that was laid down by the builders in the 50s, the passage of people's feet and walking have changed the paths a lot. And this kind of natural tendency to create desire lines has sort of created the pattern of the maze in this kind of continuous way, in this like kind of amazing, like unintentional like dialogue between people's feet and the landscape. And so these two aspects of the mazes form like the original design and then this unintentional created evolved shape is something that we want to respect both of these aspects of the maze when we do this restoration, and we don't want to just kind of return it to some kind of presupposed like before state, but we want to kind of keep its evolution, I suppose, but in a way that's respectful and usable to people. This is a little photo of the community archaeology group at the ancient village on Nornor, and they're going to come and help us with the restoration, along with a ranger from the Wildlife Trust, hopefully, and Catherine.
Yeah, so this is
So this will be
happening
our like dream
Saturday.
team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be happening this Saturday. I don't know if any of you are in Scilly and free. 10 a.m. We're meeting at Old Town to walk over to the maze together. And what we would like to do is kind of work out a continuation of the current paths to make the labyrinth unicursal again. So unicursal means just one path, but not to try and restore it to its original form, not that we could because we don't have any pictures pre-1990, but to continue what's kind of happened, but link it all up again. So all the paths are walked in the design. Um, and that will hopefully prevent further erosion because if they're all walked, then they should all erode at the same time and not fall around. So that's our hope anyway.
Mm. So our last little piece of information is, well, actually, would you like to tell the story about how we kind of came across this?
So we had been asking all over the place if anyone knew anything about who had built the maze. I asked my granddad and he didn't know, and we put out on Facebook and things, and we would just, people were like, oh, maybe it was servicemen, maybe it was visitors, and we were just kind of sure that we weren't gonna find out. And then a man who we know here who does guided walks came up to me in the pub and was like, Teän, I saw your post about Giant's Castle Maze. I was walking past it one day doing a walk and I saw a man having his photo taken, an old man having his photo taken next to it. And I asked him why, and he said that he and his sister had built it in it's either 1952 or 1959, when their father was the tenant at Tremorlethen Farm. And I could have kissed him because we had no idea. And then we had a lead. So then I asked my granddad if he knew who the tenant was at Tremorlethen Farm in the 1950s, because we knew that they weren't really connected with Scilly anymore. And he said that it was a man called Captain Hayes, who was from the west coast of Scotland. And I asked if he had any children, and he said yes, a son and a daughter, and he thinks that they were called David and Helen. So this was this is who we believe made the maze. And we have reached out, but we've not heard back from them yet. But we are hoping that we will hear from them and get to better understand their motivations for building the maze and what inspired them. So this has been a really lovely kind of investigation part of the journey of trying to find out as much as we can about it.
A big thing that we're hoping for actually is some older documentation of the maze, because currently the oldest photo we have of Giant's Castle Maze is from 1990. And the maze was made in 1952, 1959. So that leaves a big gap between when it was made and our earliest documentation of it. So we'd like to, if there's anyone who's here tonight who might have an older photo of Giant's Castle Maze, then we would be really happy.